This is going to be one of the best comic book storylines that we've ever covered on the channel because it is Spider-Man fighting the Hand, but it's not just Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Punisher. So if you weren't sitting up in your chair before, you are now. So what this does is this initially opens up with Spider-Man being asked a favor by Reed Richards. Now, we will offer an explanation on the Hand here in a minute because I feel like it'll be necessary, but the long and short of this is that while Spider-Man's dealing with the Hand, he gives us kind of a flashback, right? And Reed Richards asks him, do you have a relationship with Daredevil? And of course, Spider-Man, always joking, says, I don't kiss and tell. But Reed says a professional relationship, right? He's more likely to listen to you than most others. And so Reed explains, right? He says, yesterday he came to me with something astounding, a data drive built from the unstable molecules of an old Fantastic Four costume that was torn in battle and that it was probably left by Johnny Storm. And where Spider-Man asks the question of why he should care about the drive and what's on the drive, Reed says, one engineered from unstable molecules, it could pretty much have whatever it wants on it, right? It has limitless capacity and redundant self-healing firewalls. And according to Daredevil, critical organizational and financial data on 5 of the world's most powerful crime cartels. So we're talking about Hydra, Advanced Idea Mechanics, the Hand, the whole 9 yards. And so that's where Reed says that Daredevil had Reed pull data on Black Spectre, but instead of giving the drive back, that Daredevil took off. Right, that Reed says he took advantage of the fact that I cannot abandon this experiment without destroying a neighboring universe. And Peter just says, I mean, I can without inadvertently destroying a neighboring universe. I'll look into it and I'll be back. And that's when you pick up with Peter when he starts to encounter the Hand ninjas. Now, let's have a conversation about this. So the Hand in Marvel Comics technically dates back pretty far, but the only real origin of the Hand that you need to concern yourself with came from the miniseries Elektra the Hand, when Elektra Nachios became the leader of the Hand. And what that origin specified was that the Hand as we know it now originated with a guy named Kagenobu Yoshioka. And while there are a lot of things that surround his motivation, the long and short of it is that Yoshioka had basically wanted to ally various samurai schools or organizations within the nation of Japan that would stand against the Japanese government. And while over time some of those factions were infiltrated by a group called the Snake Root Clan and so on and so forth, ultimately they all unified. The issue with the Hand is that over time it was ultimately influenced by a being called the Beast, which is basically this demonic entity. And in fact, the Hand as it exists now, which is to say being able to resurrect dead ninjas, different things like that, it all comes from the power of the Beast. What makes the Hand so dangerous in Marvel Comics is 2 things. Number 1, the fact that they can resurrect dead ninjas. But number 2, when the Hand comes for you, they'll do it in one of 2 ways. Either the Hand will send like a singular ninja after you, right? And they will be so prodigious at what they do, they will kill you with no one even knowing how in the world they killed you at all. It'll be a mystery to virtually anybody out there outside of people like Wolverine or Daredevil who have regular dealings with the Hand. Even Spider-Woman Jessica Drew would be able to figure it out because she's dealt with the Hand as well. The alternative to this is that the Hand sends everyone after you. They'll send hundreds of ninjas after you, which is exactly what happens here. And so that's where Reed tells Peter, if the rest of the underworld has learned of that drive's existence, heavy hitters are already on its trail. And that's why Peter realizes the Hand is here. Now, he says, the Hand were scoping out Daredevil's offices from a neighboring rooftop, which they can do because Daredevil, aka Matt Murdock, has the worst kept secret identity since Hannah Montana. And man, whatever you're doing right now that does not involve fighting ninjas, Matt, I hope you're having a better night than I am, because Peter has to deal with these guys right off the bat. The kicker about this is that while Matt Murdock is in his office, the Punisher is there. Right? And that's where Matt just says, it's a little late for a visit, Frank, even if you're packing a bottle of rye instead of a gun, which makes sense. All great conversations start off with alcohol. And he just says, it's the good stuff. That must mean you want something. And so initially, Matt asks Frank who his friend is. And Frank's kind of dismissive at first. And Matt just says, the whiskey almost hides it, but it's there beneath the scent of sterile gauze, raspberry, and jojoba oil, not the shampoo that I would expect from you. And that's when you end up finding out the person that Matt Murdock is talking about is Rachel Cole. Now, we will technically get her origin story, at least to a degree, as we get further through this, but the long and short of it is that Rachel Cole was introduced during Greg Rucka's run on The Punisher, Volume 9, which is a phenomenal run for Frank Castle's character. Greg Rucka knocked it out of the park. But Rachel Cole was basically a woman whose entire family and seemingly everybody at her wedding was shot up, so it wasn't that dissimilar from like Kill Bill. But the important thing is that she's essentially on the same path as the Punisher. Her goal is to go after the Exchange, the group that was behind the deaths of her family, her friends, and her husband. So their similarities are striking there. But do not let that concept fool you. Rachel Cole is a hoss. She is amazing. And that's where Frank just starts addressing Matt directly. And he says, you have a problem, Matt, and I can solve it. Now, Matt's just kind of like, is it the way you solve all your problems? And the Punisher just says, everyone knows that you have the drive, and they will kill you to get it, right? I can use it. I can hurt them with it. I can keep it safe. So give me the drive. And Matt Murdock just kind of dismisses this, right, with almost a bit of a smirk, where he's like, you can use it, Frank, right? You would use it to kill people. Aside from the moral objection, that would make me an accessory. You can keep it safe. Right now, it is as safe as it's ever going to get. So it's a good try, Frank, right? A social call, booze to try and muddy my senses, but I know a setup when I see one. And so at that point, Frank is just like, you're blind, Murdock. And when that happens, it's basically the cue for Rachel to detonate the ceiling, literally the roof, blow the whole thing in, which that is definitely enough to muddy the senses of Matt Murdock. And so where initially Rachel and Frank confront Matt with the intention of taking the drive, Spider-Man comes busting into the room with all these hand ninjas coming after him. And he's like, hey, apologies for the damage, kind of in a hurry with the ninjas and all that. And then Peter looks around and he's like, of course, the Punisher. And he's brought a friend who's a girl. And Peter has a thing for redheads. And she's not that bad looking. So you guys can kind of see where that's going to a degree. And that's where Matt's just like, we have a problem, right? And Spider-Man just says, yes, exactly that, right? We have a problem. And I don't think that they're here to do the windows. Because again, Peter was only facing off against a handful of hand ninjas. Now, there's dozens of them, damn near 100 at this point. And so he's just like, it can't really hurt to ask, right? And so Frank's just like, fall back, right? Get to the choke point. Because Frank Castle understands when it comes to facing off against the hand, they'll surround you as fast as humanly possible, and they will come in with overwhelming force, which is exactly what they're doing. You got to funnel them into a choke point and take as many as you can out while you can. Guerrilla warfare tactics, pot shots, whatever phrase you choose to use to describe surviving as best you can when it comes to a force like that. But that's the crazy thing, is that in the middle of all this, Peter's just like, wait, right? No killing. Nobody dies. And Frank's just like, everybody dies, kid. And he says, sometimes you even get to pick when. And honestly, that terrifies Peter, because the reality here is that Spider-Man's scared of the Punisher. Not terrified enough that he would never confront him, but the Punisher, this guy is intense, right? When you come face to face with Frank Castle, you better make peace with whatever God you believe in, because the goal of Frank Castle is to send you to meet your maker, which he most assuredly will do. So it's a pretty extreme level of violence when it comes to this guy. And so they jump out the window and try to escape as best they can while fending off members of the hand. Now, they're able to do it relatively fast, but that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Between the three of them, right, they're able to handle these guys quite readily. They just pummel the hell out of them. But here's the thing, right? At that point, the question's asked by Rachel, how many more are there? And Spider-Man just says, my spider sense is not kicking me in the temple anymore, which generally means that we're safe. And he asks, right, Daredevil, do you see anything? And Daredevil's like, I'm looking at 360 degrees. There's sirens approaching, but there are no hand members. And so that's when it's a chance to sit down and figure out what to do next. And so Matt says, right, the only reason I've been able to keep the Omega Drive from Hydra and the other mega crime lord cartels this long is because one of them has to figure out how to take it without starting a global gang war with all of the others, which is a fair point. If Advanced Idea Mechanics, for example, were to take the drive from Matt Murdock, now they become public enemy number one, and it would actually provide them with a massive level of control over all the other crime families. Blackmail, essentially. But again, as Matt points out, if that happens, you're talking about a gangland civil war. And so he says, I got tired of waiting, so I brought down Black Spectre right in front of all of them and confessed that I was getting an itchy trigger finger. And so at that point, Rachel just says, so phase 1 was to force contact. What was phase 2? And Matt's just like, improvise. I didn't really have a phase 2. I didn't have a second part of this plan. I was just kind of going by the seat of my pants and just figuring out what to do next. And so that's where Frank says, right, Black Spectre had a leave behind, made certain everyone from the Hand to Zodiac knew you had the drive. And that's where Spider-Man's like, and that's how they painted a giant target on your back. And he says, for the love of God, Matt, why didn't you just hand the drive over to S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Avengers? And Matt says, insurance. While I have it, Mega Crime won't dare come after Matt Murdock's friends or coworkers. And that's where Rachel calls them naive. She's like, sure they will, right? They always will. They will always make the innocent pay. And you're a fool to think otherwise. And that's when Peter picks up on who Rachel is, recalling back to the newspaper article from the Daily Bugle about her family being massacred at her wedding. So now he realizes she thinks and functions the same way as Frank Castle. Her statement that the enemies will always come for you is not an honest and objective kind of observation of the nature of the criminal world. She's out for revenge. And so her entire view of the world is clouded by her own personal experience. And so that's where Punisher just says, you want to solve your problem, give me the drive. And Spider-Man's just like, so giving it to you is like giving a flamethrower to a pyromaniac. No offense to, pyromaniacs. But the Avengers, Matt, Reed will understand, right? Besides, what's he gonna do with it, right? That thing is not like a USB drive, right? It's firewalled and copy protected to a subatomic level, right? Only someone like Reed has ready access to even mine that drive. And so he would have pulled all the data from it, not just lame duck black specters, if you had asked him to. And so that's where Matt just says there wasn't time. And he says, but even then, there was some overlapping info on the other cartels. And so that's where Peter just says, perfect, right? And none of us plays defense better than offense, correct? And so that's where Rachel, in hearing all of this, just kind of says, wait, so you're suggesting a coordinated plan of attack? And Peter says, exactly. Daredevil gives Death Wish 1 through 400 the intel, of course referring to Frank, because Death Wish was just a series of movies where they just wouldn't stop making it. And he says, you two lead us straight into the lion's den. And he says, while Reed's gizmos prep for download, we can keep Megacrime too busy to strike at Daredevil by running the noisiest 3-man and 1-woman blitz of all time. And so initially Frank's like, no, right? It's just drawing too much attention. It's making too much noise. And Spider-Man's like, I think you mean yes. Otherwise, you're passing up the chance to hit 4 crime cartels all before dawn. And Frank's like, well, I mean, when you put it that way, we'll need 40 minutes to prep the action, right? And Peter's like, with 0 fatalities? And Frank's like, 45 minutes. But yeah, we can do that. And so that's when the plan comes together. Daredevil says, okay, then that's the play. One night of chaos. Draw all the crime families into the open. And Spider-Man finishes that and says, and then very showily and very definitively destroy the Omega Drive before their very eyes, returning your life to whatever the hell you call normal. Keeping in mind, they would have downloaded all the information off the drive before they destroy it. And so at that point, Frank's like, so wait, we're gonna destroy it? Then like, what do I get out of all of this? And Peter's like, what do any of us get out of all of this, man? Like, we're doing this to help Matt. Right? That's the whole point behind this. Now Frank's just kind of like, okay, fine. Meet us at this address in 1 hour and be ready for a very, very long night. And it is, man. I told you guys, it's one of the best stories, right? And so at that point, you end up switching over to Punisher, specifically Punisher issue number 10 from Greg Rucka. Now, the cool thing about this is that it doesn't really switch perspectives the way you normally see when it comes to crossover stories that jump between individual comics. It just tells one cohesive narrative that spreads across all 3 comics, which is really, really phenomenal. And so you pick up with Daredevil, where he's like, Reed doesn't really mind you essentially breaking into the Baxter building and then using all of his stuff. And Spider-Man's like, I'm doing science. Right? Reed loves it when I do science. And so that's what he says, right? Hit the red button. And Daredevil's like, which one am I supposed to hit? And Spider-Man's just like, the big one in the middle, my guy. And he's like, I hope I got this right. Otherwise, I will fry every electronic south of the 45th parallel. And so what you end up realizing here is that at the outset, it's just a data scrape, right? Spider-Man says that. We can give the information to Frank and to Rachel. And so that's where Daredevil says, but here's the problem. The drive is made of unstable molecules, so how do you even destroy something like that? And that's where Spider-Man reveals a device that he's created that will break down unstable molecules. Now, this, of course, is really rooted in Spider-Man's time as part of the Future Foundation. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, it was during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run when Spider-Man had basically joined the Fantastic Four. It was pretty amazing. Yes, we covered it. We'll post a link to that down in the description as well. But that's where Spider-Man says, you do realize that what we're doing is like juggling live grenades while dancing the tarantella in a lion cage while wearing a meat dress, right? And Matt just says, you're only saying that because working with Castle makes it really hard to keep friendly in friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And Peter just says, right, working with a Punisher puts the in insane. That's really what it is. We're working with a guy who just loves to kill. Now, the reality here is that Punisher did make a promise to Peter that this would be a non-lethal operation. And when Punisher makes an agreement, he usually keeps it. Now, the crazy thing about this is that while Matt and Peter are heading to the location of where they're supposed to meet Frank, they end up on a bridge where there's basically a kind of accident, right, traffic and everything like that, and a woman's giving birth to a baby. And so the husband will not let Spider-Man help, right? One, because he's a menace, and two, because this comes out of a handful of story arcs like The Others, Spider Island, I believe, different things like that, where basically it was this idea that, like, you know, Spider-Man is perceived negatively by society. And so it ends up being Matt Murdock that helps give birth to the baby. And the mom's just like, I mean, you know, like, Daredevil's kind of a cute name. We could name her Dare. And the husband is seemingly, he doesn't really say it, but he's seemingly like, absolutely not. But once they actually get, right, back to Frank and to Rachel, Frank offers yet again, right, you could just give me the drive and let me use it my way. But at the end of the day, Matt Murdock knows if they give the drive to Frank, Frank's gonna start killing people. And so it's basically enabling Frank to go on a warpath and kill folks. More important than that, though, for Matt Murdock is that while Frank Castle would use the drive to go after these various crime families, while Frank Castle tries to minimize collateral damage, it's not the most important thing to him. And that's why Matt makes the statement, you don't know what damage you could do, even unintentionally. You've always targeted those you perceive as guilty. This would claim innocent lives as well. So again, no, that is not going to happen. And so finally, once the plan comes together, Frank Castle says, working in two elements initially, will engage in simultaneous strikes. Cole and Spider-Man are first element. Daredevil and I are the second. And Spider-Man's like, not a chance. And Frank's like, what are you talking about? He's like, dude, you've been eyeing that drive from Matt the entire time. Do you really think I'm gonna let you pair up with Matt Murdock so you could potentially just betray him and then take the drive for yourself? No. You and I are teaming up. Matt and Rachel, they will team up together. And so that's when you pick up with Spider-Man and Frank Castle taking it to Hydra. I mean, absolutely pummeling these guys, while at the same time, Matt and Rachel are going after advanced idea mechanics. Now, these guys get sorted out pretty quickly, but this leads to Matt confronting one guy and saying, look, here's the rub. There's a message that I want you to deliver to your superiors. If they want this drive, they will be at Grand Central Station at 3 a.m. They don't want to be late. Got it? And so once he lets the guy go, he says, get out there and spread the word to as many people as you possibly can. Now, for a moment, Rachel wants to kill this guy. And in fact, Matt kind of talks her down and says, look, I get where you're coming from and I see where you are going. And you're going to end up going down the exact same path as Frank Castle. Do not do that. If you let vengeance dominate your life, it will destroy you. Now, that's a message that he's going to reiterate again here in a little bit, but it's one of the coolest things. He's always trying to talk reason into her. And so what ends up happening is that once all these forces are effectively neutralized, right, the message is sent out, and now they're all just at Grand Central waiting, you pick up with Spider-Man and Frank, and Spider-Man says, how many do you figure are going to show up for this? How many did you plan for? I mean, if each group sends maybe 10 guys, that's at least 50, providing they all play nice and don't attack each other first. That's 50 guys that we are going to have to take care of. 50 guys who absolutely won't want Magoo, who absolutely will not want Daredevil to turn that Omega Drive into scrap. 50 really motivated guys. So this plan of yours, it better be a good one. That's all I'm saying. And so when it turns out that Frank's not listening to him, Peter's just kind of like, I'm glad we had this talk, Frank. I really cherish our little chats. But that's where Frank realizes everybody's starting to show up. So they all end up getting inside. And once you get to the balcony, when everybody starts filing in, Daredevil addresses everybody and says, I have something you want. Every secret you have, it is here. Every secret your enemies have, it's here. Just knowing the Omega Drive exists is enough to turn all of you inside out with fear. And that fear now controls you. You will do anything to get this back, to keep it from your adversaries and from each other, because you know whoever can access what's stored here, they can destroy every last one of you utterly. Now take your readings and you will see the energy signature confirms that I am telling the truth. This is the real thing. This is the Omega Drive. And because none of you can play nice, I've made an executive decision to take it out of play once and for all. And so when he goes to fire the device, suddenly he gets hit from behind. Rachel bends down to pick up the Omega Drive and takes off. So Matt literally gets betrayed, right? And so at that point, you pick up with the Daredevil comic, the final issue and all of this, and where he's literally being attacked by all these forces. He says, I lured all of Megacrime into a trap, used the Omega Drive as bait. A cocky idiot is exactly where I was, right? Where's my backup? Because while Frank Castle's firing his rubber bullets into the crowd, Spider-Man whisks down, grabs Daredevil, and gets him out of there as fast as possible. Because if Daredevil had stayed down there, if Spider-Man hadn't gotten to him in time, they would have killed him. Right, they would have beat him to death. And so that's where Daredevil explained what happened, right? That he was shot from behind. But Spider-Man says, right, I see no wounds, but trust the spider sense. That crowd is not using rubber bullets like Frank here or like Rachel. But that's when Spider-Man realizes Rachel's gone. And he asks her, right, Punisher, where's your sidekick? And he just says, not sidekick, ally, until about 20 seconds ago, when she ambushed Daredevil, grabbed the Omega Drive for herself, and took off. And so at that point, Matt's just like, you're kidding me, right? Did you even see which way she ran? And he's like, nope, too busy covering your ass. I may as well tell you right now, I always thought your part of this plan was really, really stupid. And so Spider-Man's just like, also impossible now. The gun I built to obliterate the Omega Drive so Megacrime would stop hounding you for it, it did not survive the stampede. So now there's no way to destroy that thing. And so at that point, Matt's just like, does anyone have any good news? And Spider-Man's like, I mean, my hiccups are gone, right? Right in opera. Cole really has no clue how much she's put herself at risk. Nice mentoring, Frank. And Frank just says, I repeat, right, not my responsibility. And so Matt just says, and I'm guessing no idea where she went to. And where Frank just says, yeah, like that's correct. Then at that point, Matt says, then we have to split up and we have to find her. She cannot have gotten far on foot. Spider-Man, you go check outside and I will check inside. Frank, cover our exit and enjoy the free target practice. And Spider-Man reminds him, right? No kill shots. And that's where Frank says that was the deal. And Spider-Man's like, yeah, but I will not be here to supervise. Frank is a man of honor though, right? He's like, that was the deal. I will not take lethal action against these guys. And so they end up taking off in order to find Rachel. And so at that point, once both Spider-Man and Daredevil are outside, Matt just says, right, like, go look uptown. I want to check out a hunch. And then he says right back around to where Cole was positioned inside their terminal. With all the tumult below, no one would even hear me arriving. So she didn't make an exit through a window. She must have run through the station somehow. And he says, I swung her up here via Billy Club. So there has to be some other way to access this spot. And using his vision, that's when he finds it. And he says, she smells of jojoba oil and gunpowder, not the hardest scent to follow. And so he says, ground level, west door blown. So at least I have a compass to go by. But once I hit the street, the trail goes cold. The city that truly never sleeps. Too many odors, too much sensory input. Listen hard, Matt. Listen for all you're worth. And that's when he says, yes, I have something. Maybe talk it out. And so that's where he says, where would she have gone specifically? She knows the drive is not plug and play. It has to be read by special equipment. She cannot get into the Baxter building, but there's one other place close by. And he takes off, only for us to find out Rachel was listening in with a microphone. And so once Matt enters into the building, it's empty. And it turns out it was an ambush, right? Because when Rachel shows up here, Matt uses his batons, knocks the gun out of her hand, and she's like, what is this? Right? And he just says, special equipment at the Baxter building and nowhere else. I said what I said out loud because I heard a familiar hum, electronic with a touch of feedback. So you were listening and I was luring. And he says, thanks for following. I thought it was best to have this conversation away from Megacrime Con 12. And so it's cool, right? It shows how capable Matt Murdock is, luring her into a bit of a trap. But here's the funny thing. It's not really Matt trying to pummel this girl or beat the hell out of her. I mean, of course, he wants the drive, but if what he was looking for was a fight, they would have already gotten to blows at this point. And so he says, you had a decent lead on me, lady. You could have been halfway uptown on the 6th by the time I mapped your exit. So why weren't you? I can tell you why. Because you are an amateur, because you froze in place once the seduction of the double cross subsided, and you realize that having the prize is pointless without any way to use it. And so where she says, then make me a way, the response of Matt, or what? Right, you already shot me with rubber bullets once, and they hurt, but they didn't kill. And where she says she changed ammo, he tells her that she's bluffing, and she's like, am I? right? And then he starts reading her heartbeat. But here's the funny thing. He says feedback from the mic totally cloaks her heartbeat. So that shows that she knows what she's doing. And so he just tells her, right, you want to use what's on this drive just to avenge your husband? It's not worth it. And she asked, right, like, I mean, how in the world would you know? And he's like, oh, okay, I get it. You're special. Right? And she's like, don't mock me. And he says, no, I mean it, right? The bad guys took somebody you love, and it hurt worse than anything you could have ever imagined. Me too. They took my dad. Your buddy Frank, they took his wife and his kids, right? And he says, you want to know who else has that story? Go to Avengers Mansion and throw a stick. Everyone I know has lost someone in that way, and it never stops aching. And I'm sorry, but that does not elevate you. Just because you had it really bad once does not mean you're the only one that's ever had it really bad. And your story is not the only story, right? Your story is every story of everybody who's ever struggled or had something taken from them. So nothing makes you special. And that's what he says. What does make you special is that you have game, obviously, and focus. I've seen you in action. You've got the stuff. So put it to good use. And she says, that's exactly the plan. And it always was. Do not lecture me. You know what gives me the strength? My loss. We are alike in that way, I imagine. And she says, admit it, nobody who's a stranger to that particular pain could ever be as driven as us. And Matt freaks and he loses it. And almost it seems very uncharacteristic for him to respond that way. But there's a reason behind it, and it's a really good one, right? He says, don't ever say that to me ever again. That is a repellent statement. It is a vomitous insult to every cop, every fireman, every soldier alive who steps up to fight for those who can't. I am sorry for your loss, but if you genuinely believe that only the death of a loved one can motivate a human being to take up a cause, then get your pathetic, cynical ass out of my way so that I can do my job. That's kind of what she needed to hear. Now, she's walking around with all this pain and kind of following this belief system that she's the only one that's really experienced meaningful loss in that way. And everybody else, right, is just kind of people existing in this world, right, that is really just kind of a world of her pain and suffering. That's not true at all. Again, she's not the only person to lose anything. She's not the only person to feel that pain. Everybody has felt that pain. It's just a lot of people do something productive about it instead of sitting around all day being miserable. And so that's when Matt tells her, right, Cole, holding that drive will not make the anger go away. It makes you a target, not a weapon. But that's where Matt starts to figure out that there's people coming for them. Someone's chasing after them, right? 50 yards out, 40 yards out. And he says, Cole, someone's tracking the drive's energy signature. They are coming for us and fast, and I can hear them. Do not be like Frank. His story will never have a happy ending. His life is nothing to envy. Yours can still be healed. But if they find you with that drive, then it's over. Now, they will kill you, and they will take the drive, and you are not capable enough to be able to fend them all off, right? They're 25 yards away, then they're 20 yards away. And he says, I will help you get rid of the pain. I will see to anything that you need, and I will show you a new strength. Just please do not die today. And so she hands him the drive. But the problem is that as soon as she does that, she gets gunned down, right? Hydra agents end up firing on her. And he's like, I had her, right? And so at that point, Matt goes after all the Hydra agents. Now, here's something to understand about Matt Murdock. Right? Matt Murdock can be killed in a million different ways, right? You could fire a bullet from a rooftop, right? I mean, you can kill in the way you can kill any normal person. But the reality here is that there's two versions of Daredevil. There's Daredevil when he's just out on a night trying to deal with criminals that are out there. Then there's Matt Murdock when he's pissed. And woe betide the poor soul that comes across a pissed off Matt Murdock. Because while Matt Murdock is unleashing holy hell on Hydra, Frank Castle comes in, and Frank Castle jumps into it all. And then Spider-Man shows up, and now they're all beating the tar out of Hydra. And so at that point, right, Matt gives us this monologue, and he says, between them, Frank and Spider-Man cut through Hydra like lightning, right? Too slow for me, even though I know that once we clean up the trash, I have to deliver the bad news. And that's where he tells Frank, right, about Cole. And Frank just says, like, we thought she was with you. And he's like, she was. He says, Frank, for God's sake, right, she's gone. Just before you showed up, they gunned her down. But that's where Frank looks around and says, no blood. She was armored, unlike some idiots. And so Spider-Man's just like, look, shut up, Frank. It looked like she dropped some ammo though, right? Because Rachel made it out in one piece. She's not dead. And that's where Daredevil just says, no, she left it for me, so I would know that she was bluffing. she did have rubber bullets in the gun the entire time. And so that's when he says, I don't imagine that we'll catch her at least this time, right? We'll look, but I mean, that's, the best that we can do. And Frank just says, right, it's not your problem. I will find her if she wants to be found. If she doesn't want to be found, I'll never see her again. But that's where the question is asked, right? Is there anybody else coming after us? And Frank just says, no, right? You're welcome. And he says, I'll leave it to you and the Boy Scout here to sort out that drive. That was also our deal. I got what I wanted, right? A night of reminding Megacrime why they should be afraid of me, right? I believe I'm done here. Unless, and at that point, Spider-Man's like, no, right? I am not going to let you start putting bullets in the domes of these Hydra agents that we've webbed up, right? The reality here is these guys are going to be handed over to the authorities. And that's it. I mean, we beat the tar out of them, right? We put the fear of God in them. That's good enough. And so that's where Spider-Man asks Daredevil, right? Are you ready to hand over the Omega Drive? That was our arrangement, right? I still have to find some way to smash that thing. And that's where Daredevil just tells him that was for theater, remember? And we just pummeled the last of our audience into submission. And so Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, right? Like, there's no way he's going to get it from Matt, right? And Matt just says, that puts us right back where I started, holding a hot potato and hunted by all of Megacrime. And so Peter asks him, right? I mean, if that's true, then why are you smiling through all of this? And Matt's just like, I came up with a new plan. And Peter's like, well, I mean, I like it when Captain America says that. It fills me with confidence. You, not so much. Do you need a hand? And Matt just tells him, right, we'll talk, right? I'll buy you a drink sometime. We'll have a toast to all of this, and the toast will be to second chances. But the two of them end up going their separate ways. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Again, this is the Omega Effect storyline. I probably should have specified that. It's phenomenal. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.